Can you imagine someone standing up at your wedding, grabbing the mic and telling everyone you're not good enough, only to realize, seconds later, that you hold a secret powerful enough to shut the entire room down? That's exactly what happened to me. While my mother-in-law spent years trying to convince her son I was worthless, she had no idea I had already built an $8 million company from nothing. And what she discovered that day will completely change how you see being underestimated, but you have to hear the full story first. My name is Zara Monique Ellis, and if you had seen me 20 years ago sitting on the cracked front steps of a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Atlanta, wearing shoes 2 sizes too small, eating a peanut butter sandwich with no jelly because the jelly ran out on Tuesday, and payday wasn't until Friday, you would not have believed what I'm about to tell you. You would not have believed that the little girl with the ashy knees and the second-hand backpack would one day walk into a room and, not just figuratively, literally, own it. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before the triumph, there was the pain. Before the crown, there was the crushing. And if I'm going to tell you this story the right way, the honest way, I have to start at the very beginning. I have to take you back to where it all started. Back to the roots. I grew up in a household held together by the sheer force of my mother's will. My mother, Claudette Ellis, was a woman who worked 3 jobs and still found the time to braid my hair every Sunday morning before church. She was a healthcare aide during the week, a cashier at the grocery store on weekends, and a seamstress at night hunched over her sewing machine at the kitchen table after she thought my sister and I were asleep, her glasses low on her nose, her fingers moving with a kind of quiet precision that I didn't appreciate until I was much older. My father was not in the picture. He left when I was 4, and my mother never spoke badly about him, not once. All she ever said was, "Zara, a man who leaves is a man who was never fully there to begin with. We don't mourn the absence of something that was never whole." I didn't understand that as a child, but I never forgot it. My sister Kezia was 2 years older than me. Kezia was the bold one, the loud one, the one who wore bright colors and laughed too hard and took up space without apologizing for it. I was different. I was quiet, watchful. I noticed things. I noticed how the lights in Mrs. Patterson's house across the street were always on, even at 3 in the morning. I noticed how Mr. Dawson at the corner store always gave you slightly less change than he should. I noticed which of my classmates wore the same outfit twice in a week and which ones cycled through new clothes like it was nothing. I filled all of these observations away in a mental drawer, not knowing then that this habit, this compulsive noticing, would one day become my greatest professional asset. School was the one place I felt like I had a fighting chance. Not because the schools in our neighborhood were exceptional. They were not. They were underfunded, overcrowded, and staffed by a rotating cast of teachers, some of whom genuinely cared, and some of whom were clearly just waiting for a better opportunity elsewhere. But I loved learning. I loved the way a book could teleport you. I loved math, the clean, unambiguous beauty of a problem that had a correct answer. I loved the idea that if you understood the rules of something, truly understood them, you could bend them in your favor. By middle school, I was running a small operation out of my locker. Nothing illegal. I want to be clear about that. I was buying candy in bulk from a wholesale store. My aunt took me to one Saturday and reselling it at school. Jolly Ranchers, Takis, those little sour straws that made your tongue bleed. Kids would come to me before first period, during lunch, between classes. I kept meticulous records in a spiral notebook: who bought what, how much I made each day, what sold fastest on Mondays versus Fridays. By 8th grade, I was making $60 a week, which I split 3 ways: a third to my mother, a third to savings, a third to reinvest in inventory. My math teacher, Mr. Okafor, found out about it one afternoon when he saw my notebook. I braced myself for detention. He sat down across from me and said, "Zara, do you know what you are?" I shook my head. He said, "You're an entrepreneur, and I don't want you to let anyone talk you out of that." I never forgot Mr. Okafor. High school brought new challenges and new awareness. I became acutely, sometimes painfully aware of class, of the difference between where I came from and where some of my classmates came from. There was a girl in my AP English class named Brittany Holloway. Brittany was everything. I was not, at least on the surface. Her parents were both attorneys. She lived in a house in a gated community in Buckhead. She wore Burberry on casual days. She was not unkind to me. Brittany was not a mean girl in the traditional sense. She was just completely, almost cosmically oblivious to the gap between her world and mine. One afternoon, our teacher assigned a project that required us to visit a local business and interview the owner. Brittany suggested we visit her father's law firm. I suggested we visit a small black-owned restaurant on Auburn Avenue that had been open for 40 years. Our teacher let us each do our own project. I spent 3 afternoons at that restaurant, a place called May's Southern Kitchen, run by a 72-year-old woman named May Josephine Tatum, who wore a floral apron and called everyone baby. May had started that restaurant with $400 and a borrowed deep fryer. She had survived recessions, a flood, a fire, 2 divorces, and the death of her eldest son. She had never taken a business loan. She knew every regular customer by name, by order, and by the particular corner of the restaurant they preferred to sit in. I sat across from May at a small table in the back, past the kitchen where the smell of smothered chicken and cornbread wrapped around you like an embrace. And I asked her every question I could think of. How did she manage inventory? How did she handle difficult employees? What was her biggest mistake? And what did it teach her? May answered every question with the same unhurried patience, occasionally getting up to check on something in the kitchen or greet a customer, then returning to the conversation as if no time had passed. At the end of my last visit, as I was packing up my notebook, May said something to me that landed differently than anything any adult had said to me up to that point. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You're going to build something, Zara. I can see it in the way you ask questions. You don't just want to know what you want to know why. And the why is where all the power is." I walked home that evening through the Atlanta heat, my notebook pressed to my chest, and for the first time in my life I felt something I hadn't really felt before. Not just hope. Something more concrete than hope. Something that felt like certainty. I was going to build something. I just didn't know yet what it would cost me to get there. Senior year brought the first real test of that certainty. I had applied to 6 colleges. My first choice was Spelman. Spelman was a dream, not just any dream, but a specifically shaped, precisely textured dream. I had visited the campus once on a school trip and stood in the middle of the yard and felt the weight of every woman who had ever walked those grounds and done extraordinary things. I wanted to be one of them with a fierceness I could feel in my chest. The financial aid package came back short, significantly short. My mother sat at the kitchen table with the letter in her hands, and she didn't cry. My mother almost never cried, but her face did something complicated and painful that I wished I hadn't seen. I told her I would figure it out. I worked every summer job I could find. I applied for every scholarship within reach. I wrote 37 scholarship essays in one summer, sitting at the kitchen table where my mother used to sew, my fingers calloused from typing. I got 7 of them. Combined with loans and work study, it was enough. Just barely enough. But enough. I arrived at Spelman in the fall with 2 suitcases, a second-hand laptop, and a certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The campus was everything I remembered and more. The air was different there, charged with something, some particular combination of ambition and sisterhood and history that I had never encountered anywhere else. I was surrounded by brilliant, driven, extraordinary black women from every background imaginable. And for the first time in my life, being smart was not something I had to hide or apologize for. It was currency. I declared a double major in business administration and communications. I joined 3 organizations. I started a campus blog about entrepreneurship that slowly, then suddenly had 12,000 readers. I took every internship I could get. I slept 5 hours a night for 4 years, and I would do it again without hesitation. But it was in my junior year that everything changed. It was in my junior year that I met the 2 people who would become the twin pillars of the next chapter of my life. One who would build me up, and one who would spend years trying to tear me down. The first was a woman named Dr. Pamela Achebe, my business strategy professor. Dr. Achebe was Nigerian-American, Harvard-educated, and possessed of a mind so sharp you could feel it in the room. She saw something in my work that she chose to name out loud in front of the class one Tuesday morning. "Zara Ellis thinks like a CEO," she said, matter-of-factly, the way you'd point out that the sky was blue, and I felt something shift permanently inside me. The second was a man named Marcus Devereaux. And Marcus, God, where do I even begin with Marcus? Marcus Devereaux walked into my life on a Thursday evening at a mixer between Spelman and Morehouse, and he walked in the way. He did everything with absolute, unhurried ease. He was tall, 6'2", dark-skinned, with close-cut hair and a smile that arrived slowly, like it was making sure it was wanted before it fully committed. He was studying architecture. He had hands that moved when he talked, drawing invisible structures in the air. He was funny in an understated way, the kind of funny that crept up on you. And he listened. God, he listened. In a world full of people waiting for their turn to speak, Marcus actually listened. We talked for 3 hours that night. Just talked. About our families, our ambitions, our fears, our favorite books, the particular texture of our childhoods. By the end of the evening, I knew 2 things with absolute clarity. I wanted to know everything about this man. And whatever was beginning between us was not casual. It did not feel casual. It felt like the kind of beginning that you would one day look back on and mark as the moment everything changed. We were together from that night forward. What I did not know then, what Marcus told me gradually in pieces, the way you ease into cold water, was that he came with complicated geography. His family was from New Orleans. His father, Douglas Devereaux Sr., was a retired postal worker, a quiet, dignified man who built birdhouses in his garage and made the best gumbo I'd ever tasted. His father was wonderful. His mother was a different story. Her name was Gloria Jean Devereaux, and from the very first moment I heard Marcus describe her, something in me went very still and very alert, the way it does when your body knows something before your mind does. Marcus described his mother carefully, lovingly, even because Marcus was constitutionally incapable of speaking unkindly about the people he loved, even when they deserved it. But in between the careful words, between the loving framing, I could hear the shape of what he wasn't saying. I could hear the control, the conditions. The way her love for him was real, but wrapped in something that made it difficult to receive without cost. He told me she had very specific ideas about who he should be with, who was worthy of her son. He told me she had ended 2 of his previous relationships through sheer force of interference. He told me she was going to be a lot when I met her, and that I should be prepared. I told him I could handle it. I had no idea what I was talking about, but that, as they say, is a story for the next chapter. I met Gloria Jean Devereaux for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in April of my senior year at Spelman. Marcus had arranged it carefully, a family dinner at his parents' home in New Orleans, timed to coincide with spring break. He had prepped me for a week beforehand. Not in a way that frightened me, but in a way that made me understand this was not a casual occasion. He told me what to wear, something conservative, nothing too bright. He told me what not to bring up: his older brother Andre's divorce, his cousin Terrence's legal troubles, the fact that Gloria had been passed over for a deacon position at her church. He told me to compliment the food, to offer to help in the kitchen, to address her as Mrs. Devereaux unless and until she told me otherwise. I absorbed all of it. The Devereaux house was a handsome double shotgun in the Tremy, freshly painted, immaculately maintained, with a garden in the front that bore clear evidence of serious, sustained care. Window boxes with impatiens. A magnolia tree so large and full it seemed to be offering shade to the whole street. Wind chimes on the porch that caught the April breeze and made a sound like something between music and a conversation. Marcus's father opened the door. Douglas Devereaux Sr. was exactly as described, a broad-shouldered man with a soft voice and a handshake that made you feel safe. He looked at me, and then at his son, and smiled in a way that said he had been hoping for something like this for a long time. Gloria was in the kitchen. I heard her before I saw her, the precise, controlled sounds of someone who is very much in command of their space, the efficient movement of pots, the deliberate snap of cabinet doors, the murmur of a gospel song hummed under her breath, just loud enough to announce her presence. Marcus led me in. She turned around. Gloria Jean Devereaux was a handsome woman in her late 50s, compact, beautifully dressed, even in her own kitchen, wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress and pearl earrings on a Sunday afternoon. Her hair was perfectly pressed. Her posture was extraordinary. She had Marcus's eyes, large and dark, but where his eyes were warm and open, hers were calculating. They moved over me in a single, unhurried sweep, and what I saw in them was not hostility, not exactly. Not yet. What I saw was assessment, the kind of assessment that has already reached a verdict and is simply cataloging evidence to support it. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile, technically speaking. All the right muscles, all the correct warmth signals, but it did not reach those eyes. "So you're Zara," she said. "Not a question, a verdict." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Marcus speaks of you so often." "Does he?" she said. Not a question either. A door, gently but firmly closing. Dinner was a masterpiece, culinarily speaking. Red beans and rice, fried catfish, potato salad, collard greens, cornbread. The kind of meal that takes all day to make and communicates clearly that the person who made it is exceptionally competent and wants you to know it. I ate with genuine pleasure and said so. Douglas was delighted. Marcus watched me with quiet attention and something like admiration. Gloria watched me differently. Throughout the meal she asked me questions. Polite questions on the surface, but each one was shaped, I noticed, like a small test. Where exactly did I grow up? What did my father do? What did my mother do? Did I have other family? What were my plans after graduation? What kind of salary did I expect in my first job? I answered everything calmly and honestly. I told her about Atlanta, about my mother's 3 jobs, about growing up without my father, about my plans to go into business. I did not perform shame about any of it, though I understood that was what she was looking for. Some crack in my composure, some flush of embarrassment at the contrast between my background and her son's family's relative stability. I refused to give it to her. She escalated. "Marcus tells me you're quite the businesswoman," she said at one point, her voice draped in a sweetness that I had already learned to distrust. "Running a little blog, is it? How nice." Of course, Marcus is going to need a partner who can provide real stability. Architecture is an unpredictable field. "I agree," I said pleasantly. "That's why I'm building something that will provide that stability." She said and looked at her plate. After dinner, Marcus and his father went to the garage to look at Douglas's latest birdhouse project. Gloria and I were alone in the kitchen. This, I understood, was intentional. She handed me a dish towel and we stood at the sink together. For a long moment she said nothing, just washed dishes with that same controlled efficiency. Then she said without looking at me, "My son is exceptional, you understand that?" "I do," I said. He was always exceptional. From the time he was a little boy, his teachers knew it. His coaches knew it. Everyone who ever met him knew it. A pause. "I have always known it." "Of course," I said. "A man like that," she said, still not looking at me, "deserves a particular kind of woman. A woman who matches him. A woman who comes from the right kind of background, who has the right kind of family." Now she looked at me. "I don't say that to be unkind, Zara. I say it because it's true." I stood very still. "I respect your honesty, Mrs. Devereaux," I said. "Do you?" she said. "I do," I said, "and I hope over time you'll also respect mine." She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something I couldn't quite read. Then she turned back to the dishes. "We'll see," she said. I drove back to Atlanta the next morning with Marcus's hand in mine and a very clear understanding of what the next several years of my life were going to involve. Gloria was not going to be won over easily. She might not be won over at all. She had decided what I was before she met me, and she was going to spend every interaction we had looking for confirmation of that decision. What she did not know, what she could not have known, because I didn't fully know it yet myself, was that she had just met the wrong woman. I graduated from Spelman that May with honors, a job offer from a mid-sized marketing firm in Atlanta, and a plan that was still more skeleton than flesh, but that had a spine to it, a spine I could feel. Marcus graduated from Morehouse the same weekend. We stood in our respective regalia on a bright May morning and took photographs with both our families, and in every photograph with the Devereaux, Gloria stands just slightly apart from me. Not noticeably, not rudely, just enough. Just enough to say without saying it, you are not one of us yet. I noticed. I filled it away. Marcus took an entry-level position at a prestigious architecture firm in Atlanta. We got an apartment together that fall, a small one-bedroom in Midtown that we furnished slowly, one piece at a time, hunting through thrift stores and estate sales on weekends, turning it into something that felt like ours. Gloria called Marcus every Sunday without fail. I was always present for these calls because Marcus kept nothing from me. I would sit at the kitchen table with my laptop working and listen to one side of the conversation. Marcus would answer his mother's questions with patient love, and I would listen to the silences, to the pauses, to the particular quality of the air when Marcus would glance at me from across the room with an expression that said, "She's doing it again." She was always doing it again. But I had work to do, and I did it. Here is something nobody tells you about building a business from nothing. They tell you it's hard. Everybody tells you it's hard. You hear it so many times it stops meaning anything, the way a word loses its meaning when you repeat it too many times. Hard. It's hard. It'll be hard. What they don't tell you is the specific texture of the hard, the particular flavor of it at 2 o'clock in the morning when you've been staring at the same spreadsheet for 4 hours and you've found an error in your projections that means the number you thought you had doesn't exist. The way the hard feels when you've pitched your idea to 12 different people and 11 of them looked at you with that particular combination of pity and dismissal that you start to recognize the way you recognize a smell. The way it feels to watch someone with half your intelligence and twice your connections move faster than you simply because of what they came from. That's the hard they don't tell you about. I started Zara Ellis Consulting in year 2 of working at the marketing firm. I didn't leave my day job, I couldn't afford to, and I wasn't reckless in that particular way. I built it on the side, in the margins of my life, in the hours before work and after work and on weekends while Marcus drew buildings on large sheets of paper at the kitchen table and we listened to jazz and drank too much coffee. The business started as marketing consulting for small businesses, exactly the kind of small, scrappy, beloved businesses I had grown up watching. Black-owned businesses. Restaurants, boutiques, salons, service businesses that had incredible products and terrible visibility. Businesses that were being outcompeted not because they were inferior, but because they didn't have access to the kind of strategic marketing support that larger companies took for granted. I charged what I could charge, which at first was not much, but I was good. I was very, very good. I had a gift for finding the story inside a business. The human, emotional, resonant core of what they were doing and why it mattered, and communicating it in a way that made people want to be part of it. My clients started seeing results. Results begat referrals. Referrals begat more clients. More clients begat higher rates. By the end of year 1, I had 14 clients and was earning more from the consultancy on the side than I was from my full-time job. I quit the firm on a Tuesday morning in October, sitting across from my manager with a calmness that I think surprised her. She tried to counter-offer. I thanked her graciously and declined. Marcus came home that evening to find me sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by business plan documents. A half-eaten sandwich beside me, my hair in a messy bun looking more alive than he had seen me look in months. "You did it," he said. "I did it," I said. He sat down on the floor beside me, right there among all the papers, and he held my hand, and we sat in silence for a while in the way that two people can only do when they are completely and genuinely in sync. "She's not going to like this," I said, meaning Gloria. "She doesn't have to," Marcus said. Gloria did not like it. When Marcus told her the following Sunday, I heard her through the phone from across the room. Not the words exactly, but the tone, clipped, precise, and coded in the particular kind of concern that is actually just judgment in a trench coat. She told Marcus that his girlfriend, she never called me his partner, never called me by name on these calls, had made an impulsive decision, and that he needed to be realistic about what that meant for his future. She told him that he needed someone stable, someone who understood responsibility. She told him that she had known from the beginning that I had a certain type of recklessness about me. Marcus told her calmly that he believed in me. Gloria said, "Your belief doesn't pay a mortgage, Marcus." There was a silence. Then Marcus said, "I'll call you next Sunday, Mama." He put the phone down and looked at me, and I looked at him. And so something passed between us in that moment. Something that wasn't anger, wasn't hurt, wasn't fear. It was something harder and cleaner than any of those things. It was resolve. I went back to work. Year 2 of the business. Year 3. The growth was not always linear. There were months that frightened me. Months where cash flow got tight and I had to make decisions I didn't love. I hired my first employee, a young woman named Destiny, freshly graduated, brilliant, hungry, who had found my work online and sent me the most compelling cold email I had ever received. I hired her immediately. She was the first of what would eventually become a team of 31. I moved into an office. A real office with my name on the door in gold lettering. I still remember the morning. The lettering went up. I stood in the parking lot and looked at it for a full minute. Ellis Strategic Group, and I called my mother, and when she answered I couldn't speak for a moment, and she said, "Baby?" And I said, "Mama, I have an office." And she made a sound I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Marcus and I got engaged in year 4. He proposed in the garden of a restaurant in Piedmont Park, down on one knee in a September evening, with a ring he had designed himself, because of course he had. Marcus was not a man who purchased something that could be made. The ring was extraordinary. A solitaire diamond set in a band of rose gold that curved like an architectural line, like something between a building and a piece of music. I said yes before he finished asking. We called his parents that night. Douglas wept with joy. I heard his happy sobs through the phone from across the room, and I loved that man completely. Gloria said, "Well, that's news." She said it the way you'd say it about a weather report. Mild, slightly unexpected, not particularly welcome. Marcus laughed it off. He was skilled at laughing off the things his mother did. He'd been practicing since childhood. I did not laugh it off. I was building an empire. The woman behind the curtain did not approve of me, and I was about to marry her son. And I was, though none of us knew it yet, about to become her son's boss. Let me tell you how it happened, because it didn't happen the way you might think. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't strategic, it wasn't revenge, not then, not at that point in the story. It was simply business. The best decisions often look simple from the outside and feel inevitable in retrospect. And this was both of those things. Marcus's architecture firm, the prestigious one he'd joined after Morehouse, went through a difficult period in year 5 of our relationship. The economy had contracted in ways that hit commercial real estate hard, and the firm responded the way firms do: restructuring, downsizing, a quiet but unmistakable thinning of the herd. Marcus, despite being talented, perhaps because he was talented, and therefore a perceived competitive threat to certain people above him, was among the restructured. He came home one Thursday evening and told me. He was calm about it. Marcus was almost always calm, which was one of his greatest gifts, occasionally in moments like this, quietly devastating to witness. I told him not to worry. I told him we had savings. I told him to take the time he needed to find the right next step, not just the fastest one. What I didn't tell him, immediately, not that night, was that I had a project coming up at Ellis Strategic Group that needed an architectural consultant. A significant project. A partnership I was developing with a commercial real estate developer in Atlanta who wanted to revitalize a stretch of downtown properties and needed someone who could translate design vision into spatial narrative, which was exactly the kind of work that lived at the intersection of architecture and storytelling, and was, in a word, Marcus. I sat with it for 2 weeks. I turned it over and over. The complication was obvious. We were engaged. He was about to become my husband. There are very clear reasons why you don't employ the people you sleep next to. Reasons with names like conflict of interest and professional boundary and what happens if this goes wrong. But here were the other facts. Marcus was extraordinary at his work. My client needed exactly what Marcus could provide. I ran a rigorous professional operation with clear contracts and expectations, and I trusted Marcus completely to operate within them. And Marcus needed the work not financially, not yet, but professionally. He needed momentum. He needed to keep building, to keep moving, to not let a setback hollow him out. I called my attorney and my business advisor. I disclosed everything. We structured the engagement with full transparency, a formal contract, defined scope, clear boundaries, regular review. I told Marcus about the project and the offer on a Saturday morning across the kitchen table with all the documents in front of us. He looked at the papers. He looked at me. "You're offering me a job," he said. "I'm offering you a contract engagement," I said. "Significant project, top of market rate, full professional credit. Read every word of that contract before you sign it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, that slow, deliberate smile that arrived like it was checking if it was wanted. "You drew this up before you talked to me," he said. "I like to be prepared," I said. "Zara, are you seriously offering me a job?" "I'm seriously offering you a contract engagement." He laughed. He picked up the contract. He read every word, which I had expected and respected, and then he signed it. He was extraordinary on the project, of course, exactly as I had known he would be. The client was thrilled. The work was some of the finest Marcus had ever done. I watched him move through it with a kind of creative freedom that his previous firm with its rigid hierarchy had perhaps constrained. He delivered ahead of schedule. The client extended the engagement. The engagement led to a second project, and a third. By the time we set our wedding date, Marcus had been working as a contracted consultant for Ellis Strategic Group for 14 months. He was formally, professionally, on paper, my employee. And Gloria Jean Devereaux did not know. I want to be precise about that because I think it matters. We didn't hide it from her as a strategy. We simply didn't volunteer it. Marcus told his parents he was doing independent consulting work, which was accurate. He told them he had a significant anchor client, which was accurate. The name of the client, Ellis Strategic Group, was not information Gloria had thought to ask for, and we had not thought to specify. Would it have been better to tell her? Perhaps, perhaps not. The honest answer is that there was no version of telling Gloria that ended well, and we both knew it. If we told her, she would immediately redraw the narrative in a way that made it about weakness. Her son, working for his fiancée. How embarrassing. How unstable. What does that say about him? What does that say about her? What will people think? She would make it small and shameful, the way she made most things small and shameful when they didn't fit her picture. So we didn't tell her. Not yet. Not until she forced our hand. She forced our hand at our wedding. I thought about the little girl on the cracked front steps with the second-hand backpack and the shoes 2 sizes too small. I said to her, silently, "We made it, baby. We made it." The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 1:45, I stood in the antechamber of the garden pavilion with my mother on one side and Kezia on the other, listening to the sounds of 80 people settling into their seats, the soft blur of conversation. The sound of the string quartet playing something achingly beautiful. I was not thinking about Gloria. I was thinking about Marcus standing somewhere on the other side of that garden, in the suit he'd had made, probably completely calm in the way that he was always completely calm, probably making the officiant laugh with some quiet, well-timed joke. I was thinking about the life ahead of us. The doors opened. The garden was breathtaking. The late September light fell exactly as I had hoped it would, golden and deliberate, and the wisteria and the oaks were everything I had imagined. 80 faces turned toward me, and in 80 faces I saw love, genuine, warm, uncomplicated love, and I walked through it toward Marcus with my head up and my back straight and my mother's hand in mine. Marcus saw me at the end of the aisle, and something happened to his face that I will keep in my chest for the rest of my life. The ceremony began. It was beautiful, every word of it. We had written our own vows. Of course we had. And Marcus went first, and what he said was so specific, so deeply and precisely about us, about the particular life we had built together, that several people in the audience made sounds, involuntary sounds, the sounds people make when something true strikes them. I spoke my vows. I had written them 3 weeks before and rewritten them 6 times. I spoke them from memory, looking at Marcus. Everything in the garden was still. And then, into that stillness from the left side of the 3rd row, a voice. I need to say something. Gloria's voice. The officiant, a warm, experienced woman named Reverend Diane Moore who had been officiating weddings for 30 years, paused. The garden went very, very quiet. Marcus turned. I turned. Gloria Jean Devereaux was standing. She was dressed magnificently, as she always was, a deep green mother of the groom ensemble, hat and all, gloves, pearls. She stood with that extraordinary posture of hers, shoulders back, chin level, and she looked not at Marcus and not at the Reverend. She looked at me. I need to say something, she said again, louder now, addressing the garden. Before these vows are finished, before this is made official, I need to speak. Douglas Devereaux reached for his wife's arm. She moved smoothly out of his reach without looking at him. From somewhere in the crowd I heard a sharp intake of breath. I heard Kezia say, very quietly, one word that I will not repeat here. I heard someone, one of the New Orleans relatives, make a sound that was something between approval and nervous energy. I stood very still. I love my son, Gloria said. Her voice was controlled, pitched to carry, the voice of a woman who had stood up in churches and meeting rooms and knew exactly how to command a space. I love my son, and it is because I love him that I cannot stay silent while he makes a decision I believe he will regret. Marcus spoke. Mama. Marcus. The word was gentle and absolute, a door closing. Let me finish. She looked at me. Zara Ellis, she said, I have watched you carefully for the past 5 years. I have watched you present yourself as someone that I'm not convinced you are. You come from nothing, and I don't say that as an insult. I say it as a fact. You grew up without stability, without foundation, without the kind of family structure that produces... Gloria. Douglas now, his voice low and urgent. Gloria, stop. She did not stop. Without the kind of family structure that produces genuine partnership. You have a business. Yes, I know about the business. A small consulting operation that you have been running for a handful of years with no guarantee of its future. You have ambition. I'll grant you that. But ambition alone does not make a wife. Ambition alone does not make you worthy of what my son... Gloria. Marcus's voice was different now. Not loud, but different. Something had shifted in it. That is enough. She looked at him. Marcus. I said that is enough. The garden was so quiet I could hear the wisteria moving. And then I put my hand on Marcus's arm gently. He looked at me. I shook my head. I've got this, I said. Quietly, just for him. He looked at me for a moment, and in his eyes I saw everything. The love, the fury on my behalf, the willingness to take over if I wanted him to, and the trust, the absolute trust to let me handle it as I chose. He stepped back. I turned to face Gloria. She was still standing. She met my eyes with complete composure. She was not embarrassed. She had come to this garden with this speech prepared, and she had delivered it. And she was not embarrassed because she believed in her complicated and total love for her son, that she was right. I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked out at the garden, at the 80 faces, watching this, some horrified, some fascinated, some somewhere in between. Thank you, Mrs. Devereaux, I said. My voice was clear. My voice did not shake. A murmur moved through the crowd. I hear everything you've said, I continued, and I want to respond, not with anger because I don't feel anger right now. I genuinely don't. I feel clarity. Gloria's eyes were steady on mine. "You're right that I come from nothing," I said. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta with a mother who worked 3 jobs. I grew up wearing secondhand shoes. I grew up without a father. I grew up without the structural advantages that you believe are required to build something worthy." The garden was absolutely still. "What I built from that nothing is a company," I said. "A company called Ellis Strategic Group. We currently serve 43 clients. We have 31 employees. We are in our 6th year of operation. Last year, we posted $8.4 million in revenue." Somewhere in the garden, someone gasped. I didn't look to see who. "I'm telling you this not to impress you," I said. "I'm telling you this because you called my stability into question in front of everyone I love, and stability, Mrs. Devereaux, is precisely what I am." Gloria had not moved. Her expression had shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight change around the eyes, the first hairline crack in that extraordinary composure. I let a moment pass. "And there is one more thing I want you to know," I said. "One thing I have never told you directly, because the time was never right, and because Marcus and I believed it was professional information that didn't need to become personal." I looked at her. "For the past 14 months, I said, your son has been working as a contracted consultant for Ellis Strategic Group. He has done outstanding work that I am immensely proud of and that our clients have praised without reservation." Absolute silence. "The paychecks he's been receiving for that work," I said, "have my signature on them." The garden erupted. I want to describe what happened in that garden in the 30 seconds after I finished speaking, because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Sound rushed back in, not gradually but all at once, a wave of voices and gasps and movement. I heard Kezia from somewhere in the crowd make a sound that was equal parts laugh and cry. I heard Douglas Devereaux say, "Lord have mercy," in a tone of genuine astonishment. I heard multiple conversations start simultaneously in the rows of chairs. I heard someone I later found out it was Marcus's cousin Terrence, the one with the legal troubles, start applauding, slow and deliberate, and I heard others join him. Gloria stood. She stood for what felt like a very long time. Her face was, I'll try to describe this accurately because she deserves accuracy. Even in this moment, her face was not destroyed. Gloria was not a woman whose face could be destroyed, but something moved through it that I had never seen there before. Not shame, or not only shame. Something more complicated. Something that looked around the edges like recognition. Like she was seeing me for the first time. She sat down. Douglas reached for her hand. She let him take it. Reverend Moore, who had been standing quietly through all of it with the serene patience of someone who had presided over 3 decades of the full complicated spectrum of human behavior, cleared her throat gently. "Well," she said, and her voice carried a warmth that broke the tension like a window letting in air. "I have been officiating weddings for 30 years. A pause. That was a first. Laughter, real laughter from most of the garden, and in the laughter the atmosphere changed. Marcus turned to me. His eyes were full. "I'm so in love with you," he said quietly. "I know," I said, and I smiled. "May we continue?" Reverend Moore asked. "Please," Marcus and I said simultaneously. The ceremony continued. We said our vows, the ones we had written. We exchanged rings. Marcus's hands were steady, mine were steady. When Reverend Moore pronounced us married and Marcus kissed me, the garden erupted again, and this time it was uncomplicated and pure and everything a wedding moment should be. We walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, and I felt every single step. The reception that followed was against all odds, perhaps because of what had happened extraordinary. There was an aliveness in that room, an electricity that I think comes only when something real has occurred. When the masks have come off and the glossy surface has cracked and what's underneath has turned out to be worth seeing. People came to me throughout the evening and held my hands and looked at me with expressions that I understood, expressions of recognition, of "I see you now completely," of something like gratitude for the realness of what they'd witnessed. My mother danced every song. Kezia gave a maid of honor speech that had the room alternating between laughter and tears. Destiny and the other bridesmaids toasted us with genuine joy. Douglas Devereaux hugged me at the end of the night and said nothing, just held on for a moment, and in that hug I understood that the father had always seen me, that the father had never needed convincing. Gloria was present throughout the reception. She sat at her table. She ate. She spoke to relatives. She was composed in a way. She was always composed, which was completely, at whatever cost to herself. She did not approach me. Toward the end of the evening, the late, tender, golden end, when the crowd had thinned and Marcus was talking to his brother and I was sitting alone for a rare, quiet moment at a table with my shoes off and a glass of champagne, she came to me. She walked across the room in that extraordinary posture of hers, and she sat down in the chair across from me, and she placed her hands on the table in front of her, and she looked at me. I looked back. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words arrived differently than I expected, not reluctantly, not with the sound of something extracted. They arrived quietly, simply. I waited. "What I did today," she said, "was wrong. It was wrong before I knew what I know now. And it is still wrong, and I'm sorry." I held her gaze. "The things I said about your background." She stopped. "I have always believed that the circumstances you come from determine the person you become. I still believe that. But another stop. I read the circumstances wrong. I read you wrong." The garden was quiet around us. The string quartet was playing something slow. "Mrs. Devereaux," I said. "Gloria," she said. "Please, I think you've more than earned the right to call me Gloria." Something in my chest shifted. "Gloria," I said. "I accept your apology." She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her eyes was different, still deep, still watchful, but something had opened. "You built something remarkable," she said. "The company, everything." A pause. "I was so busy looking for what you lacked that I couldn't see what you had." I nodded. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Honestly." "Ask," I said. Was it, she searched for the words, was it cruel to wait, to let me say all of that and then? "No," I said. "It wasn't cruelty. I didn't plan it for maximum effect. I answered you at the first moment it became necessary to answer you." She considered that. "You could have told me, before today. You could have told me who you were." "Yes," I said, "but you had already decided who I was. Would it have changed anything?" Silence. "No," she said, and in her voice was something that might have been the beginning of respect. Probably not. Marcus found us there a few minutes later, his wife and his mother, sitting across from each other in the quiet end of his wedding reception. Not exactly warm, not exactly comfortable, but present. Honest. In the same room without armor. He looked at me. I nodded. He sat down between us and he reached for both our hands and held them. This man I had just married, this patient, extraordinary listening man, and the three of us sat there together for a moment in the September evening. The story was not over. Nothing this real is ever simply over. Gloria and I would have more moments, difficult ones, tender ones, the slow and imperfect work of two strong women learning to share the love of the same man. There would be setbacks. There would be breakthroughs. There would be Sunday calls that were warmer than they used to be, slowly, gradually, like a room warming up when someone finally lets in light. But here's what I want you to take from this story. Here's what I want you to carry with you when this is over. I want to speak to you directly now. Not as Zara, the character in the story, though, I'm still her, but as someone who has lived through everything you just heard and come out on the other side, changed genuinely, permanently, gratefully changed. Because this story is not really about a wedding. It is not really about a mother-in-law, though she's a central and important figure in it. It is not even really about the moment at the altar, satisfying as that moment was. This story is about what happens when you refuse to become what someone else has decided you are. I want you to think about Gloria for a moment, not as a villain, because she is not simply a villain. Think about her as a person who had constructed a worldview, a set of beliefs about worth and worthiness and what determines a person's value, and who had built her entire approach to life on top of that worldview. Think about how thoroughly she had to believe it to do what she did in that garden. Think about what it costs a person to hold on to a belief that tightly. And think about what happened when the evidence became undeniable. She adjusted. Slowly, painfully, with the particular difficulty of someone whose pride is immense and whose love for her son is real. She adjusted. She was willing, in the end, to sit across from me in a quiet garden and say, "I read you wrong." It is not nothing. That is, in fact, enormously difficult, and I honor her for it. But here's the other side of that story, the side that is about you. For every Gloria in your life, every person who has looked at where you come from and decided what it means, every person who has catalogued your deficits and concluded that they determine your destiny, there is a choice that you have to make, and you have to make it before you have the receipts, before you have the company, before you have the revenue number, before you have the moment at the altar where the truth comes out and vindicates you in front of everyone. The choice is this: are you going to let them be right? Not about the facts. The facts are what they are. You might have come from poverty. You might not have had 2 parents. You might have worn second-hand shoes and eaten peanut butter with no jelly and gone to underfunded schools with overworked teachers. Those things might all be true. But are you going to let them mean what someone else has decided they mean? Because they don't mean you are less. They mean you started further from the line. They mean you have had to build things that other people were handed. They mean you have a specific kind of knowledge, a knowledge of scarcity, of creativity, of making something from what appears to be nothing that cannot be taught in any classroom and cannot be purchased at any price. I started from nothing. And I built something. Not because I was exceptional in ways that aren't available to you, but because I decided at a kitchen table in middle school with a spiral notebook and a box of Jolly Ranchers, at a small table in May's southern kitchen with an old woman who could see something in my questions, in a dormitory at Spelman, at 2 a.m, with a laptop and a will that refused to flag, I decided that the story someone else was telling about me was not the story I was going to live. You have that choice. You have it right now. I don't know your Gloria. I don't know the specific person or circumstance or voice, internal or external, that has been telling you who you are and what you're worth and what you come from and what that means. But I know that voice exists. I know it because it exists for almost everyone, and I know what it costs to keep hearing it without answering it. Answer it. Not with anger, with work. Not with bitterness, with building. Not with the need for anyone's validation. With the quiet, steady, compounding certainty of someone who knows what they're doing and does it anyway, day after day, in the margins of their life, if that's all they have, in the early morning, in the late evening, in the ordinary Wednesday afternoons that nobody celebrates but that are, in the end, what everything is made of. And then, when the moment comes, when the garden goes quiet and the eyes are on you and the voice has said, "It's peace," you will be ready. Not because you planned for it. Not because you rehearsed it, but because you built something real, and real things hold. I am Zara Monique Ellis. I grew up on the east side of Atlanta in second-hand shoes with a mother who worked 3 jobs and a father who left when I was 4. I built a company from nothing that now serves 43 clients and employs 31 people. I walked down an aisle in a dress I earned toward a man I love. And when someone stood up at my wedding and told the world I was not enough, I let her finish. And then I told the truth. Go build something.